Good morning, friends. Welcome back. Today is chapter 3 in Jim Ugly. This chapter is titled Smoke Tree Junction. Smoke Tree Junction was a weedy scatter of buildings on the railroad line. We were most of the next morning getting there. Jim Ugly was generally out of sight, far ahead of me in the sagebrush, with his nose in the air and his tail wagging high. He hardly spared me a glance, except when the town came into view about half a mile up the road. He finally sat for a moment and gave me a lofty look, as if to say I was a bother to have along. And did I have to make such a clatter-whacking with my spurs? The town dog, a bobtail mutt with stumpy legs, rose from the shade of a lacy green pepper tree. He barked a warning as Jim Ugly approached, and it couldn't have been the first time. Cool as you please. Jim Ugly walked on by as if the other dog had never been born. The mutt lifted his lips to flash his fangs, but he just couldn't get Jim Ugly's attention. He snarled and charged to make sure Jim Ugly knew who was the boss around there. But some instinct told him not to nip in too close. Wolves are chummier dogs, Dad told me, so the way Jim Ugly snubbed the town dog, I reckoned must be the elk hound coming out in him. After a while, the mutt quit barking and returned to the shade to nurse his hurt feelings. Jim Ugly didn't just feel the dog was worth the bother to lick, and he seemed to know exactly where he was going. He hauled up at the Indian Princess Hotel, painted a barn blue, but peeling all over so that it looked like it was shedding its skin. Jim Ugly threw himself down in the shade of the porch as if it had been there before, and let his tongue hang out like a red bandana. This, I figured, is where my dad must have stayed to get the bullet pulled out of his shoulder. And then I read off the fancy letters and gold leaf in a corner window pane. Emil Fossum, M.D., second floor. I went up the polished wooden steps. There was no need to knock. The door stood wide open. Sitting in his shirt sleeves by the window and reading a newspaper, the doctor glanced at me over the tops of his glasses. You Jake Bannock? I stood for a moment, too astounded to answer. How had he come to know my name? He broke into a laugh and stuck his cigar into his mouth. I saw that wolf of Sam Bannock's coming up the street and you following. I figured you might be Sam's boy come to find out exactly what happened here. Yes, sir. I don't know much, Sonny. But didn't he come to get the lead ball out of his shoulder? That's so, Dr. Fossum said. I was digging around in his shoulder when he quick as lightning changed his mind. Was my cousin Axie with him? He didn't tell me about that. Axie? He was standing right here. Your father was gazing out the window when he suddenly reached out for his shirt and hat. I hardly had time to yank the slug and tie up a bit of bandage. I figure he saw something from the window and the two of them lit out. I walked closer to the window and looked down. The only thing alive was a mule nibbing at the hitch rail of the barber shop. I couldn't see anything down there that would strike my father like a thunderbolt of lightning, but something had. My eyes tightened on the orange depot standing bright as sunset at the end of the street. Maybe the train had got in. 7 minutes late, said Dr. Fossum, nodding. Yes, I wondered about the train, if someone got off. Maybe it was a yellow leg and a bowler hat, I said. You mean D.D. Skeets? Is that his name? He got careless with his firearms the other night. I took some lead out of his foot. He claims to be a bounty hunter by trade. Is he still in Smoke Tree Junction? I asked. I haven't seen him. He came looking for my dad. Dr. Fossum struck a match to his cigar and puffed away as if he were making smoke signals. So he told me. He said he'd been to the funeral to show his respects. His respects? No, sir. No yellow leg showed up for the funeral. He was there, said Dr. Fossum. He might have changed his duds and kept his distance, but he saw you and the dog and the preacher asking the Lord if he had a spare set of wings to hang on to Sam Bannock. It bothered me that the yellow leg had invited himself to the services. I reckoned he might have been there, for I hardly remember lifting my eyes from the ground. Dr. Fossum said, I thought your father might want the bullet to hang from his watch chain. I didn't have a chance to give it to him. Do you still have it, sir? Think so. He went over to a roll-top desk and rummaged through pill bottles and papers and held up somebody's gallstones and clear liquid for me to see. After a while, he found a small medicine bottle with a lump of lead in it. That must be it, a 38 slug, as I recall. I held it to the light for a moment and then jammed it into my pocket. I felt a tear start up. I didn't want it to show. I'm grateful for it, I said. Dr. Fossum, do you know exactly how my dad died? A horse threw him. That's what Axie said. Maybe it had happened that way, and maybe it hadn't. I didn't think there was a saddle horse born that could throw my father. Sir, I reckon you saw him laid out in his pine box? No, said Dr. Fossum. I didn't attend the deceased. Nobody called me. The next thing I knew, Axie had him on a wagon home. I took a deep breath. Could the undertaker have gotten the boxes mixed up? Maybe Axie brought the wrong one home? The doctor slid his glasses lower on his nose and peered at me. No one else died around here about then, Sonny. There was no mistake. I was smiling inside when I ambled back down the stairs. If the pine box Axie drove to Blowfly was just full of ice and empty as a gourd, then my dad might still be alive somewhere. I half believe it, I half didn't. I was afraid to get my hopes up. I dropped down beside Jim Ugly on the porch. Nice going, Jim Ugly, I whispered, giving him a pat. I might as well have been patting a stone. Maybe it was your nose that led you here, and maybe it wasn't. You could have remembered where Dad left you. I'm obliged to you anyhow, Jim Ugly. Put your nose to this. I pulled the cork out of the medicine bottle and rolled the slug of lead from Dad's shoulder. Jim Ugly hardly seemed to breathe in the scent when he was up on all fours. He took another sniff, and I said, Find him, Jim Ugly. Where's Dad?